Hey guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. I am so glad that you're here. Today's video is my October reading wrap up. You guys know the drill by now. I do these every single month. I ended up reading 5 books in October, which is a lot less than I normally read, but I just had a lot of life stuff going on and was just kind of busy, which honestly like is a good thing, but I was also kind of getting a little down in the slumps, if you know what I mean. So let's just go ahead and get into the books and talk about my slump a little. The first book that I ended up reading was on Kindle Unlimited. It's called The Modern Girl's Guide to Magic by Lindsay Hall. This book is supposed to be like a witchy rom-com, and it's about this girl named Aria, and it's dual POV, and the other POV is about this guy named Callan. But it basically follows Aria's story, and basically her whole thing is that she lived in London and her grandma gets her and she's like, girl, like you gotta come home. And the whole reason is because she comes from a family of witches, and they also own this like little like potions kind of shop, and the area that they get the potions from is getting handed to whoever wins these trials. So if whoever wins doesn't want to sell their family like stuff for their potions, then they're gonna go out of business. So her grandma basically comes to get Aria and be like, girl, like you have to win this for us. So she does end up coming back home. It's to like this cute little witchy, like very like charming cute town. I think it's called Charming Cove. I could be making that up. And she basically runs into Callan. They met like one time in their past, and she like absolutely hates him, but he's like so obsessed with her and so in love with her. But the kicker is that they both end up being in the trials together, so they're kind of like working against each other. I ended up rating this book a 2-star. This book took me a very long time to read because I couldn't get into it. I just really wasn't enjoying it, which was very disappointing because like I wanted to read like a cute witchy rom-com because obviously like October, you know, like spooky season. So I was really excited to read this and then get into like other ones like the XX and like the Irregular Witches one because those look so cute, but I did not end up getting to any of those because this one kind of like scarred me a little bit. I really just felt no connection between the two main characters in my opinion. I didn't really like the main character Aria. I didn't really dislike her either, but I felt like she didn't really have like a personality. And I feel like the biggest plot line of the book wasn't even the trials. It was about her like discovering like how her magic works and like strengthening her magic so she could win the contest and the trials, which was fine. Like she is the main character, but it mainly talked about like plant magic, which I was expecting something like a little bit different considering that it's literally like a book about witches and they rarely ever used their powers, which kind of like really bother me too. So I just really didn't enjoy this book. If you want to hear more thoughts on this book, because I went into heavy detail on it in my fall reading vlog, go check that out. I am just kind of over it and I just want to be done talking about it. So there's that. At this point in the month, I was like kind of doing fine. I was like, okay, that wasn't like the greatest book I've ever read, but like, let's just find a new book. Let's get into something else. So I ended up reading Maybe Once, Maybe Twice by Allison Rose Greenberg. This is actually going to be in a reading vlog coming very soon. The whole thing is basically about this girl named Maggie, and this is not a romance. This was put in the fiction section at Barnes & Noble. So this is not a romance, but it's like heavy on the romance subplot. Like a heavy, honestly just like a heavy romance plot, but it's not your typical romance is all I'm trying to say. It's basically about this girl named Maggie, and her whole dream in life is she wanted to be like a pop star. She absolutely loves to sing, and she's finally getting to the age of 35 and her career just hasn't really taken off yet. And it's mainly called Maybe Once, Maybe Twice because Maggie ended up making 2 different marriage pacts with 2 different guys, and they were both for the age of 35, which honestly wild, girl. Like the fact that you didn't make them different ages is, it's a book. Anyways, and she just had her 35th birthday at the very beginning of the book, and those 2 guys end up coming back into her life, and that's all I'm gonna say about the plot. I will say this, I really don't mind a love triangle. I'll be completely honest. If it's done right. The love triangle in this book like really didn't bother me, and honestly the first half of the book was really good. I enjoyed our main character Maggie. I really liked the writing. It kind of reminded me of like an Emily Henry book, and I felt really connected to our main character Maggie, like all the struggles that she has to go through, even though I'm not like 35, but like as a woman, like I kind of get it because there's a lot of other stuff going on in her life too. And I really liked it. I was like, oh, like am I gonna find like a 5-star read that like nobody's really talking about? I was getting so excited, and then I got 150 pages in and my least favorite trope showed up. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I ended up rating this a 2.5, and it's not just because of that. I think it's also because one of the guys in here just kind of like gives you nothing. Like I'm like, like where's the spice? Where's the flavor? Where's the personality? I didn't get any of that from him, and Maggie was amazing and great. So like, I just didn't really get why he was an option, if that makes any sense. The other guy wasn't my favorite, but I definitely liked him a little bit more than like the other guy. Is this making sense? Hopefully it's making sense. I'm not gonna give anything away. I'm not gonna give any spoilers, but at the end there were some things that happened that just like absolutely were so unnecessary in my opinion, because you could have not written that in and not had those things happen and it would have ended the exact same way. I also just wasn't a fan of how the ending happened, period. Not even like that part, but I guess like who she ended up with. And also, there was like a plot point at the very beginning of the book that was not spoken about again until the very end of the book. So I thought this was gonna be like a huge thing for her. Like, it was talked about here and there, but like it was literally during the very beginning of the book. Like the first chapter, like it was so stressed about. And then it was barely talked about. I don't know. I really thought that was gonna be a bigger plot point, but it just wasn't. 2.5. Yeah. Basically at this point in the month, I just had 2 books back to back that just like weren't it for me, weren't doing anything for me. I just wasn't interested in. It took me forever to finish them and I was in a slump. I didn't want to read, and I knew that if I did read something, it had to be something that was gonna blow me away, was gonna be such a good book that I could just fly through and I would absolutely love. And I got incredibly lucky because I ended up finding that book, and that book is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. As you can tell, I liked it a lot because I tabbed it, and I am like not really a tabber. I think I have 2 books total tabbed, and this is one of them. This book is a romance fantasy, or a romantasy if you'd like to call it that, and it's in dual POV in the point of views of our characters Peyton and Kai. Basically in this society there are elites and there are ordinaries. Elites have powers kind of like superheroes almost, and there's different levels of power, and ordinaries are just like muggles basically from Harry Potter world. Like, they're just normies. A while ago the king of the society basically decided to outcast and banish all ordinaries because they carry some sort of like plague, which is like not a thing. The king just like sucks. So he banishes them, and if he finds any ordinaries in his society, he kills them. And who does he send to kill them but Kai, his son, the prince, or one of the princes, who is the king's enforcer, which is kind of like just like their, I don't know how else to say this besides lead army guy. I don't know. Like his right-hand man, basically. So Kai basically does the king's dirty work. So he's living in the palace all his life, kind of like living the high life, so to speak, but not really. But I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to give anything away. And Peyton lives in Loot Alley, which is kind of like their version of like the slums. And she's been posing as an elite for years, but she's actually an ordinary. She's super smart and she's super strong, and they are both some of my favorite main characters in fantasy books and just in books in general, probably ever. And I've only read 1 book about them. 1 book. Like, that's how good this book is. There's also trials in this book, kind of like Hunger Games types trials, but it's almost less cutthroat in my opinion. But Peyton and Guy end up getting very close to each other because they're both in the trials. This book is a 5-star read, which honestly I am so glad that it was, because it really helped pull me out of that slump. And now, ever since reading this, I have just like not want to stop reading. Like, I'm in such a mood for reading, and now that I think back to it, I think I was just not in the mood for the first 2 books. Not to say that I would feel like completely different about them if I was in the mood for them, because I personally, like, in my opinion, again, just didn't really enjoy those books or the plot or the characters and stuff like that, and the story in general. But I think that I really just wanted to read a fantasy, and mood reading is such a big thing for me, and so I'm really glad that I found this book, that I read this book, and yeah, I don't know, dare I say this might be my favorite book of the year. Who knows? Oh, also this is an enemies to lovers, which you know I love, and the tension goes absolutely crazy, which is also another reason why I loved this book so much. Like, it was super easy to understand too. Like, the fantasy elements all made a lot of sense because it was just super self-explanatory. Like, you just have elites and ordinaries, and that's kind of like really it. Like, you don't really have to figure out like a magic system. I guess you do a little bit if you count like their powers as magic, which I guess you could. Like, it's just not confusing. Like, it's just so self-explanatory, such an easy read. I was kicking my feet giggling. I love this book. This book is everything. If you want to know my thoughts on it, go check out my This Book Ends When I Find a 5-Star Read video, because I may or may not read this book in it. So if you want to see my reactions, check that out. And then we ended up reading one of my most anticipated books of the year, and that is A Curse for True Love, which is the third and final book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. I'm obviously not going to tell you what happens in this book specifically because it would spoil the series if you haven't read the first or second ones. But these books are basically about a girl named Evangeline Fox whose so-called love of her life just chooses another girl over her out of the blue one day, and she's so distraught. He never gave her any sort of explanation. It was just totally, it was like a switch flipped in his mind. Like, it was just so weird. So she goes to the church of the Prince of Hearts, and in this world they have fates. Fates are kind of like gods, like they can be killed, but they're basically like immortal, powerful beings. And the Prince of Hearts' name is Jax, and she's thinking, she's like, if anybody would get like my sorrows and want to help me, it would be the Prince of Hearts. And basically Jax and Evangeline end up just going on this crazy journey, of which that you would never expect based off of the beginning of that book. These books are like a fairy tale fantasy, so I highly recommend them if you've never gotten into fantasy and you like reading romance. I feel like they are a great segue into the fantasy world, especially because it is young adult, so it's not like super crazy to understand either. For my rating for this, I'm kind of torn. I keep going back and forth, but I think it's a 5-star. It is a part of a 5-star series for me, and I really love the way it ended. I thought it fulfilled everything nicely, and I don't know, it was just a very good ending to the trilogy. Obviously, I'm sad that I don't get to read about them anymore, and I will miss them so much. I'm probably gonna end up rereading this series next year sometime, just because I do love this series so much. Let me just say too that this is an enemies to lovers as well, and Jax will just like forever have my heart. The tension in this book is just insane. I love it. I will also say that these books also have like a mystery element to them as well. Kind of like how I said where we start from the first book and they go down a journey and you have no idea. Like, you would never expect ending up here. And that's because Stephanie Garber always keeps you guessing, and that's another thing that I love about these books so much. The biggest reason why I wasn't considering rating it a 5-star was because of the fact that the beginning was a little slow, but at the same time, like, there was such a good reason for it to be that way. I also had to wait a little bit for my two favorite characters to interact, but there was also a reasoning for that because of the way that the second book ended. So I'm gonna rate this a 5-star. I loved it. It was good. I love the characters, everything about it. I loved it. 2 5-star reads in a row, and I was feeling great, and I decided, especially since it's on my TBR for the month of October, I was going to get back into the ACOTAR series. So I started where I left off with A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. A brief synopsis of ACOTAR if you've never really heard about it. It is a fantasy romance series about a girl named Feyre, and she's immortal. She lives in the mortal lands, and she ends up breaking a treaty with the fairies that live in Prythian. So there's like a wall between Prythian and the mortal lands, and humans think the fairies are like absolutely terrifying. They don't want any part of them. They think they're absolute monsters. So when Feyre ends up breaking the treaty between the mortal lands and Prythian, things kind of go awry, and she either dies or she gets to live out the rest of her days in Prythian. So she chooses to live in the fairylands, and Feyre just ends up going on this journey in the fairylands, and there's a lot of books about it. This is technically book 3.5, but I'm gonna call it book 4. It's a novella. I ended up rating this a 3-star because it is a novella. It was good, but it just didn't do enough for me considering that it was only like 230 pages because it's a novella. But I see how it's setting up the next book in the series because there's a lot of different like Easter egging plot points that are in here. And I also like that we got a bunch of different point of views of other characters as well, because the other books are all just in first person and Feyre's point of view. And in this one we got, I think, 5 characters' point of views, so I like that a lot. And I am really excited to see where the series goes. I'm actually filming my final ACOTAR reading vlog. I have 2 other ones up right now of the other 3 books if you want to go check those out. But I'm going to be reading this book and then the A Court of Silver Flames book in that reading vlog, so be sure to watch out for that sometime in November. Okay guys, those are all the books that I read in the month of October. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts on these, if you guys have read them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video and want to see more videos from me. I am super excited for the month of November. We have a lot of good book releases coming out, and I have a lot of exciting videos planned, and I just have the itch to read, and I am so excited to get reading for the month. Okay, I think that's it. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys. Ugh. Done.